Is it a distraction or is it pure difficulty? That's the question I want to dig into in this video. In our lives, many a times, in many different areas, we face distractions, or are they difficulties? I don't even know. That's the interesting thing. And that's why I wanted to really jump into that in this video, because over my decade of coaching people how to become financially free, replacing their income predominantly, over my 2 decades now of working in the field and industry of property, quote unquote, real estate, I have found again and again that many people face what they feel are difficulties. And interestingly enough, the more and more you work with people, the more and more you assist people, the more and more you help people, the more and more you realize that what many people first think are difficulties later actually reveal themselves to really just be distractions. So I thought it would be of value in this video to speak to you about the difference between difficulties and distractions so that we can get better at recognizing what they are. Now, as I share this, the first thing that comes to my mind, which is interesting because this was not what I was thinking about when I was initially thinking of sharing this video, but I think this is super valuable to share because of how relevant it is a story in the Bible where Jesus comes to a place which is called the Pool of Bethesda. And in that place, at the Gate of Beautiful, there are, what the Bible says, many impotent folks. And I recently taught from this passage of scripture, sharing how this is a great representation of business owners and businesses, all right? And business owners many times can find locations or places where there are lots of people who need help. Okay, and predominantly lots of people who need their help. The Bible goes on in the chapter to say there were some lame, some impotent folk there. So it even describes the help that they need. And one of the things we know before we get to that chapter in the Bible, that Jesus has already healed people. So we know Jesus has the solution to what these people are facing as difficulties, all right, or as problems. Let's use that language for now. And the Bible says that Jesus goes and engages a particular person, a particular individual. And this man, the Bible said, had been sick for 38 years. All right. And the Bible describes him as waiting for the moving of the water. Okay. And all of the people the Bible described who were there because at a certain season, the water that was in the pool there would be touched or troubled by a source. Let me just use that language. And after it was troubled by that source, the people would rush to get in, and the first person to get into the water would be made whole, would be healed. So Jesus shows up and says to this person who's been there for 38 years, he says, "Do you want to be made whole?" And that's a super interesting question he asks him, because that question for me isn't birthed out of a place of recognition of difficulty. It's actually, for me, birthed out of a place of a recognition of distraction. And this is why maybe this is really fitting to share as we start in this video, because what happens a lot of the time is what we see as a difficulty, other people actually just see as our distraction. What we keep ourselves entertained with, or anesthetized, I believe that's the word, but anesthetized with, numbed with, is what a coach or a guide or someone who's further along in the same thing that we're actually dealing with doesn't see as a difficulty, because they've transcended that level. They've gone past that. They've faced that in their own way previously. So they now just see that as a distraction. They see it as a distraction that you're harboring and holding, allowing you to not launch past to get to where you really desire to get to fast. Now, what was in my mind as I was thinking of sharing this topic in this video was a saying that I heard from the late great business philosopher Jim Rohn a number of years ago. And Jim Rohn tells this story of when a group of executives from, I believe he said they were from Enron or Shell, one of those big companies at the time. And I believe he said this was the late 80s or the early 90s. But they called him in and they said to him, "Hey, Jim, what are the next 10 years going to look like?" And it was interesting because I remember when I first heard him share this in a program, I was thinking to myself, like, how are they asking him what the future is going to be like? And then he broke down that he thought the same thing. Like, how could they ask me what's the next 10 years going to look like? Who's qualified to tell you what the next 10 years are going to look like? And he then breaks down that basically he realized he is qualified to tell people what the next 10 years look like. And he then said to these executives, he said, okay, I'm going to tell you what the next 10 years are going to look like. The next 10 years are going to look like the last 10 years. They're going to look like opportunity mixed with difficulty. And I remember hearing that roughly in around 2006, maybe 2007. The next 10 years are going to look just like the last 10 years. They're going to look like opportunity mixed with difficulty. And what's super interesting for me is when you transcend the difficulty because you've held tight to the opportunity, and the opportunity becomes fruitful for you or fruitful for me, guess what happens? We look back at the difficulty and we say to ourselves, that was kind of really more like a distraction. So the question that I wanted to really unpack or explore in this video is it really a difficulty or is it just a distraction? So earlier on today, I had an amazing, rich conversation with a dear friend, dare I might say a family member, because of how close I feel to this specific gentleman, and also an investor in me and my business. And as we were talking about why so many, this was not how we framed it, but in essence, we were talking about why so many people are upping and leaving the UK. Why so many people are saying, bye-bye, I'm done. And he was sharing with me about the gap, the wealth gap. He was saying that, look, there are a lot of people in their 50s and 60s right now who, when they were in their 20s or 30s, the gap between their salary and the price of assets like property was a much smaller gap. So today, the gap between people's salaries, income, and the gap between the assets, such as property, is so much bigger that it makes it so much harder for people to be able to do things like get on the property ladder, right? Or build a portfolio of assets. And one of the things I shared with him was something I believe would be of value for me to share with you. And that was, I believe that the challenge we have is that most people today haven't realized the game is rigged. Like, the game is rigged. It's rigged against you. And one of the things I was sharing with him on the call is that in life, often when a game is rigged, the game is not rigged in the favor of the majority. The game is not rigged in the favor of the normal man, the normal person, the normal woman, the you and I, right? Often when a game is rigged, the game is rigged in favor of the house, okay? In favor of the casino, in favor of the person who crafted and curated the game. And I was basically sharing with him that, look, if we realize that the game is rigged, then we stop complaining about the soil. We stop complaining about the sun. We stop complaining about the seed in the game. We start realizing that the seed is just a seed that we have, and the soil is just a soil that we have, and the sun is just a sun that we have. Again, Jim Rohn kind of expressed all of this years ago, which is where I heard of it in that way. And it made me realize, well, it's true. Like, if people today didn't focus, #distraction, on the difference, the gap, the sizing gap, the increasing gap between their income and the asset, because there's nothing you can do about that in most cases, and that's the gap I'm talking about, then what would happen as a result? Well, what would happen is they'd stop being distracted and they'd start facing whatever the real difficulty is. And I believe that one of the main real difficulties is lack of application of our creativity towards our ability to create more cash flow. And this is the reason why I have been running the Cash Flow Creation Week since 2021. This is the reason why I create content talking to people about creating consistent and colossal cash flow. This is the reason why I'm grateful I was able to replace my income back in 2017 and replace my wife's income first and then my income, and leave the conventional work environment where my salary, my income would always be capped. Okay. And yes, we could get a pay increase. Yes, I could get a pay increase, but a capped income is a capped income, regardless of whether the number is higher than the number you're currently on. So for me, when I was working full time, if I was not going to apply myself, if I was not going to utilize my creativity and invest that in creating more cash flow in other ways, whether it be through what most people call a side hustle or the investment of my resources into stocks, into shares, into property, into stuff that can bring me some value back from the value I invest initially. So for example, I plant the seed, but the seed gives me everything I need when it turns into a tree, right? If I'm not able to apply myself in a creative fashion and creative nature. And mind you, I'm using this word creativity for a specific reason. I'm using this word creativity because in the book of Genesis, in the Bible, the first book, in the first chapter, the Bible introduces God as someone who is creative. It says, in the beginning, these are the first words in the Bible. It says, in the beginning, God created, which means God introduces himself through the pages of the Bible to humanity as a creator. Now, for those of you who know, Moses was the person who penned the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, as it's called in Jewish circles, and they're the opening lines of Genesis. In the beginning, God created. And what's even more powerful for me and pertinent for me is when we shift through the same first chapter and get to verses 26 to 28, we see that it then says, and God created man. He said, let us make man in our image and let them have dominion and so forth and so forth. But the thing that's powerful is God created man in his image. So if we're made in his image and we're made in his likeness, and in that chapter 1, where it tells us we're made in his image and made in his likeness, it also tells us a core key characteristic about him is that he's creative, then surely creativity becomes one of the fundamental foundational keys for you and me to succeed. So this is why I get amped up and excited when I start thinking about creativity, when I start thinking about what creativity is, because creativity is not what we've been sold it is. That's part of the game being rigged against us. We've been sold that creativity is being artsy, whatever that is, right? And guys, I draw diagrams in a lot of my trainings. Like for those of you who've seen some of my other YouTube videos, if you haven't, you can go check out some of my other YouTube videos. I draw diagrams quite often, and I am not a Picasso. I am not I'm not an artist. I'm not a Van Gogh, right? I'm a Samuel I Can Win. And as much as I do not have the artistic skill set to diagram and to draw things to a specific degree that artists tend to have, I understand that I am creative. And I'm not creative because I fit into the Webster's definition of creativity or the Oxford definition of creativity or any other mainstream dictionary definition of creativity. I'm creative because I'm made in the image of God. You're creative because you're made in the image of God. You're made in the likeness of God. So that's what gives you creativity as an asset, because creativity is your birthright. So when we understand that, this is where everything starts to change, because what we can now do is we can look at situations which seem difficult and recognize the elements of those situations that are actually distractions. Why? Because part of being creative is rethinking how you look at something. Part of being creative is reshaping and remolding how something is presented to you. Part of being creative is not settling for what's in front of you as it was told to you that it should stay in front of you. But part of being creative is figuring out a new solution to the thing that was in front of you that might have seemed like pollution. All right. So I'll give you an example, right? This is a Rubik's Cube, okay? A fairly more creative Rubik's Cube than most people have seen, because it's a branded Rubik's Cube for us, right? But the point I'm making is when you get the Rubik's Cube of life, or when you get the Rubik's Cube of your assets, or when you get the Rubik's Cubes of relationship, or the Rubik's Cubes of anything you're going through in life, what most people don't realize is those Rubik's Cubes can be solved. And the interesting thing is, I remember growing up believing that the only people that could solve Rubik's Cubes were really intelligent people. And funnily enough, fast forward to being in my 30s, I made a decision, right? I literally went out one day and bought like 6 Rubik's Cubes. I think I bought 5 or 6 at the time. And at the time, I think my wife and I, Robbie and I, we had 5 children at that time. We had 4. So I believe Robbie was pregnant with Jaira at the time. Now, the reason I know that is because of the house we were living in. And Jaira was born in the house we moved to after that. So myself and Robbie were married. We had 4 children at the time. I went out one day and literally purchased 4 or 5 Rubik's Cubes. And I purchased one for me, one for my wife, one for each of my children. And the mentality and mindset was, if when I was young, the subconscious psychological stigma was the only people that can solve these are intelligent people, then no matter what it takes, I need to discover, I need to apply my creativity to this game, to this puzzle, to solve it, to declare to myself, even in my subconscious, I'm one of those intelligent people. And that's what we did. I literally came home that day with a number of these Rubik's Cubes, and me and my wife worked on solving them, and we solved them. And what was interesting is after that, my two oldest children, Abigail and Elijah, began to solve Rubik's Cubes and got really good at solving Rubik's Cubes, even to the degree that we would race each other at home. Like the four of us, me, my wife, my two oldest, we'd race each other, right? To the degree that my oldest children not only can solve Rubik's Cubes faster than me, like that's hands down. Like I guess I'd use the term average. The average time it takes me to solve a Rubik's Cube is around 10 minutes. I call it 11, right? 11 minutes, because it's probably 10 and some change. So in 11 minutes, I can solve a Rubik's Cube, a traditional Rubik's Cube. And I've done this on Instagram in the past. So yeah, it was a while ago. But I've done this on the Instagram live before. Like I can solve a Rubik's Cube in around 10, let's call it 11 minutes. But my children can solve a Rubik's Cube within 3 minutes. Okay, why? Neuroplasticity. And for those of you who don't know what that is, excuse me, that is the way in which the brain thinks. That is the way in which the brain creates pathways or roads or passages in order for us to do something, and then to get better at it and better at it and better at it and better at it, which again boils down to the human creative nature. All right. So when we are facing difficulties, one of the best things we can do is take a step back and ask ourselves, is this truly a difficulty, or is this just a distraction? Because if you believe that only intelligent people can invest in property, or only intelligent people can become financially free, or only intelligent people can generate an income from assets which are like, let's use the word passive, but I don't really subscribe to the conceptual idea of passive income, right? Because I subscribe more so to the conceptual idea of residual income, because you always have to do something. Someone had to plant the seed. Okay, so by virtue of the fact someone has to plant the seed, it's not passive. The tree doesn't just grow because the tree can grow. The tree grows because someone planted the seed, someone watered the seed, and as the Bible says, and God gave the increase. Now, the reason why I share this specific component about the tree and the seed is because I found that many people do not realize the importance of what we say to ourselves. Let me just say it like that. What we say to ourselves. So if we tell ourselves, I want to make passive income, a statement such as that, what happens is we subconsciously distract ourselves, because we're telling ourselves we want to do something that probably or possibly is not possible. If it's impossible to create passive income, what does passive mean? Passive means I have nothing to do with it and it happens. Okay. Now, if I tell myself I'm going to make money from something I have nothing to do with and it just happens, and that's an impossibility, then what I've done is I've set myself up to lose, essentially, because I've said to myself, I'm going to do something that cannot be done. So therefore what happens is I look for all of these ways to do this thing that can't be done, but because the thing can't be done in the first place, I now spend my time looking at distractions but thinking they're difficulties. Whereas if I took advantage of the opportunity of finding someone ahead of me and discovering what they think about this thing, what they classify this thing as, how they term this thing, how they deem this thing in order for them to have become successful with this thing, guess what happens? They might say to me, no, this is a lot simpler than working a 9-to-5 job in terms of how it pays you, but this isn't passive, this is residual, which means you first have to plant the seed, which means you first have to water the seed, which means over time you'll have a tree, right? And what happens is when we fix the language in our mind, and again, for those of you who haven't seen, I did a video just a couple of days ago where I was talking about language mastery being part of the key to success, right? And more importantly, being part of the key to determining who can be qualified to advise you, right? So we have to get to a place, or I love getting to a place in my life. Let me speak for myself. I love getting to a place in my life where I can correct the language that has been wrong in my mind, the language that has kept me tied to a lack of success, because it's erroneous language. It's language that doesn't make any sense. But it makes sense to me from being in the position I'm in. But here's the funniest thing. If Usain Bolt can run 100 meters in less than 10 seconds, and I cannot run 100 meters in less than 10 seconds currently, then it would be valuable for me to understand the beliefs, to understand the frameworks, to understand the expectations that come along with being able to actually achieve something I desire to achieve. So what that means in a simple sense is, rather than me believing all the things I believe as someone who takes, let's say, 20 seconds to run the 100 meters dash, it would make more sense for me to sit down, for me to interview, for me to acquire information, knowledge from Usain Bolt or from a prolific runner of the 100-meter dash, to start discovering from Linford Christie, from whoever else the person is, like, how do you do this? Like, what's your belief? Like, what are you thinking when you're about to start the race? Or what are you thinking before the race? What are you thinking in your preparation for the race? How does this make sense to you? Because you're the person who's been able to do what I'm attempting to do. And this whole process of just thinking through an area of your life which you desire to have success in from the perspective of someone who's already having success in it is the game changer. And I guess, like, in a nutshell, I can give you the snapshot slogan that's in my head as I talk about this. And it's one that I often say to my coaching clients, and that is: coaching is the fastest path to success. Now, you may believe that or you may not, but one thing to think about, regardless of whether you believe that or not, is why is it that Tiger Woods, one of the most prolific golfers of our generation, had a coach? Why is it that Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players of our generation, had a coach? Why is it that LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, you name the talent, Serena Williams, Venus Williams, you name the talent, and not far behind you will find they had a coach? And the question is, why is that the case? You see, and one of the things I started to realize a number of years ago was that oftentimes the coach isn't the person that has broken that world record before the person they're coaching comes and breaks that world record, oftentimes. Which means the skill of coaching is slightly different to the skill of execution. The skill of coaching is slightly different to the skill of creation. We're creating different things. You see, creating capacity, I believe, is different to what needs to be created in crunch time. And these are some of the things I wanted to share as we think about whether the barriers in front of you are actually difficulties or whether those barriers are actually just distractions. And in all honesty and in all fairness, they might really be difficulties right now. But the moment you hold fast to the opportunities, the moment you get serious with the opportunities, the moment you commit and decide that the opportunity is going to be your primary focus and the thing you stay in tune with, you will most likely look back and deem all those difficulties as just distractions. So this is Something I Can Win. I'm signing out. I pray you got tons of value in this video. Feel free to let me know in the comments what stood out to you the most, what was of most value to you. But more importantly, like, what are your thoughts on what I'm sharing? Are you facing a specific difficulty which you don't believe could be a distraction? You don't even believe or fathom a year ahead from now, 2 years from now, 4 years, 5 years from now, you will look back and say, that was just a distraction. That was just trying to take my attention from actually focusing on the true opportunity in front of me. I'm super keen and interested to hear your thoughts. If you guys have got other things you'd love for me to unpack as it pertains to the things we're talking about in this video, then let me know as well in the comments below. If you haven't hit the like, feel free to subscribe and potentially even share this video with anyone else you know who could find this video of value as well. With that being said, Simon I Can Win, signing out. Good day, God bless. And as I usually say, remember, it's small keys that open up big doors. Let's go.